Do you know how to get there? You want me to find someone to take you over there? Let me get somebody here. Well, people online has technical difficulties, but we don't have technical difficulties. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So let's stand and we'll have an opening prayer this morning. Our Heavenly Father, we come to you this morning, and Lord, we want to thank you for this year that we've just seen and the way you've blessed us and been with us, Lord. And I pray, Lord, that you'll be with us today as we spend some time studying your word. We thank you so much for your word and the way that it guides us, Lord. And I pray in this upcoming year that we can even grow more acquainted with you through your word. Be with us now, Lord, as we begin our services today. We thank you so much for your son who really we would not even be here without him. And it's in his name we pray. Amen. We are still in the book of Hosea. We're in chapter 7 today. And chapter 7 begins a new section. Section 1 was Hosea chapters 1 through 3. And that was the allegory of Hosea and Gomer that described. And the allegory, you know, you had Gomer, who was an unfaithful wife, and Hosea, the faithful servant of God. Well, they represented a faithful God in his relationship with an unfaithful people. And then section 2 was Hosea 3 through 6. And that was an interpretation of this allegory, showing how the religious leaders of Israel had failed to teach the people to seek the Lord. And so now we start section 3, and it's chapters 7 and 8, and it basically shows how the political leaders of Israel had failed the people. You know, the last several chapters we centered on Baal worship. Okay? Well, Baal wasn't the only false deity in the land. You know, they also worship the false god of politics too. Governments, and this is something and I think in this day and age we need to really understand this, because I think we're losing this understanding in the church. In fact, I'm hearing more and more people who don't understand this. Governments were created and ordained by God. And we need to understand that. It's, you know, when you rebel against a government, the Bible, Paul says you're rebelling against God. Romans chapter 13, in fact. You might want to turn over there and we'll read this. Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 4. Paul kind of lays it out here. He says, everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. You get that? The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, he who rebels against the authorities is rebelling against what God has instituted. And those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers have no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. You want to be free from the fear of the one in authority, then do what is right, and he will commend you. For he is God's servant to do your will. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword for nothing. He is God's servant, an agent of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. So what are the leaders of a country? They are supposed to be servants of God. In Israel, you had priests, but you also had kings. All right? And they were both seen as servants of God. And Paul here is saying that governments too are servants of God. And so governments have a responsibility before God to govern in a just and fair way. They have that responsibility. And leaders who don't do that, well, I wouldn't want to be in their shoes on the day of judgment. I really wouldn't. And as Christians, we're called upon by God to obey the government that we find ourselves under, as long as the governments do not require us to disobey God. The Bible teaches, as long as they don't do that, the Bible teaches that we must submit and obey them. And it doesn't matter what type of government it is. God, like I said, God created governments to provide order within the societies of men. Think of the chaos we'd have if there was no government. You know, here, the Wild, Wild West. You want to know why we called it the Wild, Wild West? Because there really wasn't much government back then. People did what they wanted to do. Go read the book of Judges. Okay? It says in those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did as he saw fit. And that book is a book of chaos if you read it. It's not a happy book at all. So they are to provide order. They're to provide justice and fair play and protection within our society. They're to provide the framework so that we can worship and serve God in peace and faithfulness. But see, there's a problem with governments. And the problem is this, is that, you know, they're not evil in and of themselves. But men who run government are sinful, right? And see, that's the problem. We have a tendency to corrupt all the good things that God has given us. That's if mankind has a superpower, that is our superpower right there. And the government, and the problem with the government in Hosea's day of Israel and also of Judah, instead of leading the people to God, they were leading people away from God. That was the problem in Hosea's day. And as we read this section in Hosea chapter 7, he's going to talk about kings and princes and rulers and leaders at that time. And they're all Israelites, which means they should have been godly men, right? They should have known God's law and God's requirement. But instead, they were turning people away from God. I've heard this. I heard this years ago, but I believe it's to be true. And it says that a people will never rise above its leaders. And in Israel's case, that was true. So going to Hosea chapter 7, we really have to begin in chapter 6. Doesn't that make sense? And the reason for that, the last line of chapter 6 should have been put in chapter 7 because it's beginning, really, it's the real beginning of of that statement there. And it's the line that says there at the end of verse 11 of chapter 6, whenever I restore the fortunes of my people. And so the first sentence in chapter 7 should read like this. Whenever I restore the fortunes of my people, whenever I would heal Israel, the sins of Ephraim are exposed and the crimes of Samaria revealed. Okay, who's Ephraim? Okay, Ephraim was one of the half-tribes of the tribe of Joseph. They were a tribe of Israel, and the northern kingdom at this time came to be known also as Ephraim. So it's speaking of the entire northern kingdom of Israel. What's Samaria? You know, when you read this in the Old Testament, especially in these minor prophets, we need to know what we're talking about. What's Samaria? No, not at this time. You're thinking of Jesus' times. In this time, Samaria is the capital city of the northern kingdom. Okay? So it says the nation and the capital. It says, whenever I restore the fortunes of my people, whenever I would heal Israel, the sins of Ephraim are exposed and the crimes of Samaria revealed. In other words, what God is saying here in verse 1 is that the more he tries to heal Israel of their sins, the more sins he exposes. Have you ever seen, something like that? You're trying to help someone, and the more you dig, the more junk you dig up, and that's what God is saying is going on here. in that. In Hosea chapter 6, verse 10, God spoke of, he says, a horrible thing in Israel. Well, what he's saying here in verse 1 is that the condition is even worse than my first diagnosis. My first diagnosis was horrible. It's getting even worse now. The nation here, meaning the people, that's not what God intended. Okay, their condition. And instead of being a faithful people serving God, they've become a violent people. Okay? They're liars, thieves, bandits. The whole lot of them is what he's saying. That's what he says here in verse 7. Whenever I would heal Israel, the sins of Ephraim are exposed and the crimes of Samaria revealed. They practice deceit. Thieves break into houses. Bandits rob in the street. That's what his people has become. God's not happy with that. All right? Then we come to verse 2. Verse 2 says, but they do not realize that I remember all their evil deeds. Their sins engulf them. They are always before me. I think the first line there, but they do not realize, the NIV didn't translate that the best. I think the New American Standard has a better, it says, they do not consider in their hearts. That's even deeper than they don't realize, right? Okay. It says they do not consider in their hearts. See, that's their problem. They didn't take care of their heart. Is your heart important? And when we talk about heart, we're not talking about this organ right here that's pumping away, right? Hopefully it's pumping away. Okay? We're talking about who you really are. Talking about your soul, your consciousness, your unconsciousness, your emotions, your intellect. It's the whole being, who you are. See, and that was their problem. You know, Proverbs 4:23 says, above all else, guard your heart, for it's the wellspring of life. We're to take care of our heart, because our heart determines who we are. Your heart determines the type of person you're going to be. And so how do we take care of our heart? By watching the things we put into it. You put good things into your heart's going to be good. If you put bad things, bad thoughts, bad visions, bad people, friends, it's going to corrupt your heart. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Yeah. See? Yeah. You know, the Israelites, like all sinners, and I've seen this with people, believe that they were smarter than God and that they could hide their sin from him. See, that's, when you're in sin, that you think you're smarter than everybody else. And I've seen that firsthand in people. In fact, they think they're smarter than God, and they can hide it. David, I'm sure after his sin with Bathsheba, thought he had gotten away with it until Nathan showed up at his door. Luckily, David's heart was still soft enough that he responded. And as he said to God in Psalms 53, against you and only you have I sinned. He realized that he didn't get away with it, that God knew exactly what he had done. And isn't that what God is saying here? He says that I remember all their evil deeds, their sin engulfs them. They're ever before me. See, they're not getting away with it. He says, I remember all these evil things you've done. I've remembered them. He says their sin engulfs them. That's what sin does. Sin consumes us. Sin might start out small, but over time it will continue to grow, and it will consume you. That we can be sure of. verses 3 through 7 here. He says, they delight the king with their wickedness, and the princes with their lies. They all flatter. They are all adulterers, burning like an oven, whose fire the baker need not stir from the kneading of the dough till it rises. On the day of the festival of our king, the princes become inflamed with wine, and he joins hands with the mockers. Their hearts are like ovens. They approach him with intrigue. Their passions smolder all night. In the morning it blazes like a flaming fire. All of them are hot as an oven. They devour their rulers. All their kings fail, and none of them call on me. Let's unravel this for a second. This is an interesting passage when you really look at it. If there is a fool among the leaders here at this time, you know who the fool is in a court, a royal court. They call it the court jester. You know, that's the fool. If there's one in this story at all, it's the king himself. Okay? And in this passage here, it's not talking about just one king, but several kings, as we shall see. And what it's saying here is the king and his royal court, his princes, they're pleased and they're amused with the wickedness and lies which have become all too common in the nation. They've gotten comfortable with it. And it's going to have dire effects upon the leadership in the coming years now of Israel until they're destroyed. Kind of an outline. It's a reflection of their heart, really. An outline of these 4 verses here in 3 through 7. Verses 3 through 4 is exposing the sin and wickedness of the nation. Verses 5 through 6 show the political intrigue and conspiracy within the royal court. And verse 7 then shows the results of all that. Let's look at verses 5 and 6. He says, on the day of the festival of our king, the princes become inflamed with wine. He joins hands with the mockers. Their hearts are like an oven. They approach him with intrigue. Their passions smolder all night. In the morning, it blazes like a flaming fire. How would you describe these people? Drunk? Okay. They're drunk. They may be drunk, but it's not just wine they're drunk with. Okay? See, they should be celebrating, having a celebration. They believe this is the coronation of a king. And they should be celebrating the new king. But underneath, you know what they're doing? They're plotting to overthrow him. They're plotting to kill him, is what they're doing. Verse 6 says their hearts are so inflamed with conspiracy, it describes them like an oven. Okay? They flatter the king. They go up to the king and they say all the good things to him, but behind the scenes, you know what they're doing? They're plotting to kill him and overthrow him. That's what his princes are doing. The people that work with him and serve him in that. He says they are so consumed by it that it smolders during the night while they're lay on their beds. You ever have something you really wanted and you go to bed at night and you just can't help thinking about it? They really wanted to kill the king so bad they lay on their bed plotting how they're going to do it. And then it says it explodes in the flames in the morning. They get up and boom, they do what they've been plotting. Verse 7 says, all of them are hot as an oven. They devour their rulers, and all their kings fall, and none of them call on me. See, their desire for power, to overthrow the king and to take his power is so strong, it can't be contained. And so they kill or they devour their king. Think about who these men are. Who are these men? They were sons, but there are also other officials within the royal court, that served the king. Maybe his head general is among them. Okay, people who do different things for the kingdom, have different responsibilities for the kingdom, are in on that. But who are they? They're Israelites. They should be God's people. They should be godly men. But they're wicked, evil men is what they are. Why? Because they didn't protect their hearts. They run off after false religions, after worshiping Baal. They worship power now, which is what I talked about here at the beginning. They have the false religion of government or power that they're after. Yes and no. Yes and no. Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you? But see, that shows you just how, you hear the word power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. All right. They're so far from God that their king doesn't even ask for help during this time. And later on, we're going to find out where the kings are going to ask for help, because God does get to that. During this period, verses 3 through 7, it's talking about a period of 20 years. And during this 20 years, 4 kings come to power, and all 4 of these kings are going to be assassinated by their own people. The kings are Zechariah, who comes to power in 752 BC. He only lasts a few weeks, by the way, if I remember his story. Then there's Shallum, who kills Zechariah, and then there's Pekahiah, which kills Shallum, and then there's Pekah that kills Pekahiah, and Pekah is assassinated himself, I think, by his top general, and then shortly after that, the nation falls. It just kind of shows where the hearts of men are at during this time. You see how knowing history can really help you understand the minor prophets? Verse 8. Ephraim mixes with the nations. Ephraim is a flat cake not turned over. Okay. In fact, let's read through 12 here. Foreigners zap his strength, verse 9. Foreigners zap his strength, but he does not realize it. His hair is gray, is sprinkled with gray, but he does not notice. Israel's arrogant testifies against him, but despite all this, he does not return to the Lord his God or search for him. Ephraim is like a dove, easily deceived and senseless, now calling it Egypt, now turning to Assyria. When they go, I will throw my net over them. I'll pull them down like the birds of the air. When I hear them flocking together, I will catch them. See, the problem, what they're doing, instead of turning to God, they're looking for other nations to help them. They're going to other nations and signing treaties with them and looking to them to protect them. Now, there's no prohibition in the Old Testament about making treaties with other nations. There's warnings, but there's no prohibition with that. But see, here is the problem. Who really should they have been looking to for help? They should have been looking to God. But instead, they're looking to these other nations for their salvation instead of trusting God for it. And here's the thing. They're looking to Egypt and they're looking to Assyria. And both these nations turn on them at different times. And eventually, even though they're looking to Assyria for help, it's the Assyrians that's eventually going to come and conquer them and destroy them. How do you like that? Verse 8. Israel is swallowed up. Now she is among the nations. I'm sorry, wrong chapter. Chapter 7, verse 8. Ephraim mixes with the nations. Ephraim is like a flat cake not turned over. I love this example. He's taking He's using baking, okay, or cooking a pancake, okay, if you would, to describe Israel's involvement with other nations, okay? I kind of like that. He says he's a flat cake, not turned over. What happens to a pancake if you put it in the pan but you never flip it over? It's going to be burnt on the bottom side and the raw on the other side. It's not going to be very good. You know, when I read this, I thought of a curse word in the Russian language. I tell people, you know, want me to teach you how to curse in Russian? Okay. If you ever were with Russians, go around and something happens, you'll hear them say something like "blin" or "oblin." Okay, and that's a curse word in the Russian language. Translated in English is "oh pancake." Okay, it's a "oh ho cake." Then if you yes, ma'am. Uh-uh. Yeah. You know, when you make a pancake, what happens usually to the first pancake you try to make? It's usually not good. It burns, it sticks, you know, it tears, and usually throw that one away. And after that, the rest of them are really good, right? Okay. Well, the Russians called the first, the word blini is their word for pancake. Okay. Their idea of a pancake. And the blin, which is singular, is their word for the first pancake. And of course, this is a Russian joke, by the way. The Russians say when God made Adam, when he made the first man, he looked at him and went, "Oh, blin," and then he made Eve. So man is supposed to be the first blin, so to speak. And so that's how the word pancake became a curse word in the Russian language. Now you know some Russian, okay? So you can go curse in Russian and no one will even know what you're saying now, will they? Okay. But anyway, that's he's saying Israel's become the blin. Is what's happened to them. They're not good for anything, not good for anybody. And then we come to verse 9, and he says, "For they have gone," he says, I'm sorry, I keep looking at the wrong chapter. 2 chapters open here. Verse 9 says, "Foreigners zap his strength, but he doesn't realize it. His hair is sprinkled with gray, but he does not know it." What this verse is saying is all these nations that they're turning to, they're slowly destroying them. They're getting involved with these nations. And what happens back then, if you want help from another nation and the other nation's stronger than you, you know what you pretty much have to become? A vassal to that nation. You have to start paying them money or tribute every year for their protection. And what happens if you decide you don't want to pay it anymore? Well, they're used to getting money from you. They won't take that too kindly, and they'll come and send their army to force you to keep paying that money. And so Israel would run over here to one country, and they'd get tired of paying them, and they'd run to another country for protection and start paying them to protect them from this other nation. And they're just going back and forth like this. And slowly, it's sapping their strength. It's slowly destroying them. And the sad thing is Israel doesn't even realize that the nations are doing this to them. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, they don't even realize it. And these associations, instead of trusting in God to protect them. You know, the Assyrians, after they destroyed Israel, the northern kingdom, they go after the southern kingdom of Judah. They conquer every single city in Judah. And they get to the gates of Jerusalem. and they're getting ready to sack and destroy Jerusalem. The king, Hezekiah, gets down on his knees and prays. The next morning they wake up, the Assyrians are gone. God made the Assyrians believe that Judah had hired the Egyptians and their army was approaching, even though they wasn't, and they ran away for their lives. And they went back to Assyria. See, God protected them because they turned to him. And God, throughout the history of the Jews, kept telling them, I'm your protection. I will take care of you. All you have to do is trust me and obey my law, and I will take care of you. And they didn't want to do that. They kept wanting to be like other nations. And so they became like other nations. And see, that's a warning for us as Christians. We can look around us today at society and say, we want to be like everybody else. A lot of churches are doing that today, by the way. They're allowing the culture to dictate what they do and what they believe and how they act. And we can see here in the Old Testament how that works out. It doesn't. It doesn't work out. Verse 10 says, Israel's arrogance testifies against him. But despite all this, he does not turn to the Lord his God or search for him. See, pride was their problem. Their pride kept them from seeing their situation. Our pride does the same thing, you know. Proverbs 21:4 says, haughty eyes and a proud heart, the lamp of the wicked are sin. And then in verses 16 and 18 of Proverbs, it says, pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. You don't even see it coming. Your pride blinds you. Okay? Pride is not your friend. Hosea says here in verse 10 that it testified against them. We don't fool God, and we don't even fool each other. Can't you see a person with pride? After getting to know a person for a little while, it becomes obvious. You know who are people around you who are too prideful, right? See, it testifies against them. He says their pride is so bad they don't even search for God. Verses 11 and 12. It says, Ephraim is like a dove, easily deceived and senseless, now calling to Egypt, now calling to Assyria. When they go, I will throw my net over them. I will pull them down like birds of the air. When I hear them flocking together, I will catch them. Have you ever watched birds? Ever tried to figure out what they're doing? They just kind of hop here and there, don't they? Well, that's kind of what he's saying that Israel, what they're doing. Okay, they're they made a deal with Assyria, then they broke that deal, and then they go to Egypt, and then they break that deal. Eventually, their own scheming of going back and forth between all these nations is going to catch them like a net, like you catch a bird. Where I'm at, verse 13. Woe to them because they have strayed from me. Destruction to them because they have rebelled against me. I long to redeem them, but they speak lies against me. They do not cry out to me from their hearts, but wail upon their beds. They gather together for grain and new wine, but turn away from me. I trained them and strengthened them, but they plot evil against me. They do not turn to the Most High. They are like a faulty bow. Their leaders will fall by the sword because of their insolent words, for this they will be ridiculed in the land of Egypt. In verse 13, God lays out his case against them. He says, woe to them, because they have strayed from me. Destruction to them, because they have rebelled against me. I long to redeem them, but they speak lies against me. God does not haphazardly bring judgment upon people. God's not up there looking, okay, let's see here. How can I get Sandra today? No, he's not up there. That's not what God is doing. When God judges, there's purpose and reason behind it. First thing here in this passage, he says, my judgment is coming because they've strayed from me. They've left me. All right? Instead of turning to him for help, they've turned to the nations of men. You know, to stray kind of means to wander away. We talk about stray dogs, but we talk about dogs straying. How about children straying? Ever been have a little kid with you and go into a department store and you turn around and they're gone? Okay. Did they turn around and say, hey, I think I'm going to go to the toy section and take off to the toy section? No. They just start wondering, don't they? They don't know where they're going. Well, that's what God is saying about the Israelites. They don't really know where they're going. Second thing he says they rebelled against God. You know, God had sent them prophets. He sent them prophets after prophets to warn them. What did they do to the prophets? They killed them, persecuted them. He said that he brought limited judgments upon them. He allowed small disasters to come upon them, trying to get their attention. But did they listen to any of this? They listened to the prophets? Did they get the point of these small disasters that God brought on them, trying to get their attention? No. And here's the thing. None of this is God's fault. You know, there towards the end of verse 13, he says, I long to redeem them. What was in God's heart? He wanted to save them. But when they came to God and spoke to him, it was all lies. Remember in chapter 6, verses 1 through 3, the Israelites says, hey, let's go back to God. Let's turn and we'll go back to him and we'll acknowledge him and we'll worship him. And when we do that, he'll come and help us. Remember that last week we talked about? Were they sincere? No. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's you know, and God's not fooled by any of that, is he? I told you last week, words are cheap. What God is looking for is your action, how you act. And see, their problem is they thought, we got God wrapped around our finger. All we have to do is whistle and God's going to come running. No, that's not true. But we think that, whether we realize it or not. No problem. Verse 14 says, they do not cry out to me from their hearts, but wail upon their beds. They gather together for grain and new wine, but turn away from me. See, he's saying here, their confessions to return had nothing behind it. They were not sincere. It doesn't come from the heart. Here's the thing. If you're sincere, you're going to see it in the way people act, aren't you? What would you see in these people? You'd see repentance, wouldn't you? It says they gather for the feast. They come together for the good times, the celebrations. Okay? But after the feasts are over, they turn away and they go their own way. You know, we just celebrated Christmas, right? And a lot of people are celebrating the birth of Jesus, right? More people go to church during this time, because we're celebrating the birth of Jesus. Now, where are they going to be this Sunday? And the next Sunday? You know, there's a word for there's people out there that believe that the only two times they need to go to church is Christmas and Easter. Heard somebody call them one time Hallelujah Christians. See, they're really not sincere, are they? And then verse 15. I trained them and strengthened them, but they plot evil against me. See, God did all that he could to help them. Probably one of the most famous verses in Hosea is Hosea 11:3. that says, it was I who taught Ephraim to walk, taking them by the arms, but they did not realize it was I who healed them. Who would they be without God? They would be a nobody. They wouldn't exist if it wasn't for God. And God says, I taught them how to walk. I brought them into the world. And I guided them and took care of them. But they don't realize it was me the whole time. They've forgotten it in that. You know, you would think that it would make them appreciate God. Okay, verse 16. They do not turn to the Most High. They are like a faulty bow. I got to, he says basically, what is ever picked up a bow and arrow to shoot it? Ever pick up a bow and arrow and the bow's broken? How far are you going to get that arrow down the range? Not far at all, right? See, their strength is like a broken bow now. All right? And God said, I tried to strengthen them, but their alliance did nothing but zap their strength. Verse 16, they do not turn to the Most High. They are like a faulty bow. Their leaders will fall by the sword because of their insolent words. For this they will be ridiculed in the land of Egypt. God is saying here, judgment is coming upon them. And we've already said, okay, in the year, what is it? Trying to get my dates right. 725 BC, they're going to be conquered and disappear into history by the Assyrians, that they're coming. God's finally going to say, enough. And then he says, look, you had this relationship with Egypt. How do they feel about you now? They ridicule you. You're a laughing stock to them. You're a nothing to them. See, that's what happened when we turn away from God. And see, he might be talking about a nation here, but we can turn these same lessons around and apply them to us today as his church. And that's why these stories are in the Old Testament. They're in the Old Testament for us to learn from, because man is no different today than he was back then. And we need to protect our heart. And we need to make sure we're serving God and we're following his word. Last comment. You would think, oh, how our memory fails us, right? That's right. Thank you very much.